July, aimed at reaching the EU's 2030 goal of cutting emissions by 55% and putting it on track to hit net zero by 2050. So can COP26 be a game changer? Our panel today, distinguished, all of them, are to Philippe Tulkens. He's the head of the Climate and Planet Boundaries Unit, DG Research and Innovation at the European Commission. We have Michael Bloss. He's a member of the European Parliament, a member of the ENVI Committee at the European Parliament. Jana Lejak, she's the deputy head of the Slovenian delegation at the UNFCCC. And Anthony Frogart is Senior Research Fellow and Deputy Director of Energy, Environment and Resources Programme at the Royal Institute of International Affairs. And also Alison Martin, Chief Executive Officer, EMEA at Zurich. Great to have you all with us today. Thanks for taking the time. Philippe, because you have an extraordinary title and responsible for planetary boundaries, the best job title here today, you're going to kick off with the short introductory statements. Philippe.
Thank you, Brian. If you agree, I'll speak about the role of research and innovation towards climate policies, as we have here in the panel a representative of the EU presidency in the panel to talk about the real policies voice. But I think it's important to go back also to the roots. And to answer the question of this session, I would say that COP26 is another opportunity to make climate policy deliver. It's not the first one, and it's not the last chance before the apocalypse. It is though high time to ensure that all the commitments and mechanisms proposed in the Paris Agreement are defined and implemented forcefully, and that this Paris Agreement really delivers. As focal point of the European Commission to the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, I can say that the science on climate change is robust and that the messages are clear. The margin of maneuver to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius of temperature increase is now very limited, and even for the 2 degrees C target, the magnitude and pace of changes required are unprecedented in human civilization's history. I have no time here to summarize the key findings of the latest report of the IPCC adopted last August. They focus on the physical basis, but I would encourage everyone here attending to take the time to read in the text of the summary for the policymakers endorsed by 192 governments. This is where you will see what science has to say on this, and the messages have been all endorsed by the governments. And this is only it was the first part of the 6th assessment cycle reports of the IPCC. Next February, we'll have the Working Group 2 report on the impacts and vulnerabilities. And next March, the much-awaited report on the mitigation aspects, also from the IPCC. While respecting the obligation to be policy relevant but not policy prescriptive, the messages from the IPCC were reinforced from one assessment cycle to the next one since 1988. Thanks to also to the investments put in research and innovation, notably by the EU Framework Programme for Research, and the remarkable efforts of the scientific community that needs to be praised here. They wouldn't not be climate policies if there wouldn't be first excellent science there. Though action on both mitigation and adaptation is too slow, and science confirms today that much more effort and faster progress need to occur to meet the respective commitments of the Paris Agreement. Policymakers will need courage in the front line, though all actors of our economy and society have a responsibility in these immense challenges ahead of us. If we fail, it will hurt. And it started already, as we saw with the floods, the fires on many places on Earth. For the EU as well, implementing the Fit for 55 package by 2030 and getting to climate neutrality by 2050 will be extremely challenging, as the emission reduction efforts required in less than 30 years are very significant. Contributing to meeting the climate targets of 2030 and 2050 is what EU research and innovation stands for. The program Horizon Europe dedicates 35% of its budget to climate-relevant activities, and all activities funded by the EU should respect the do no harm principles enshrined in the Green Deal. This is what the EU strives for. All components of society need to be mobilized to support this unprecedented challenge at EU and global levels. Looking forward to the debate.
Philippe, thank you. Michael Bloss, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation and well, debating if the COP26 can be a game changer. It should be, and actually it should be the conference, 5 conferences after Paris, where the world comes together, and counting all of the ambition levels together, we should actually fulfill the Paris Agreement, staying well below 2 degrees and actually getting to 1.5 degrees. And this is unfortunately not happening. We are counting together, there's a global stock take happening, and it goes to 2.7 degrees around that. So we are not there. Hopefully I can say we are not there yet, but as it was just mentioned now, the science is quite clear and we do not have time anymore. 1.5 degrees, that's what the UNFCCC report says, can be already reached in the year 2030. And if we really want to have a slight chance to go to 1.5 degrees, we need to be much faster. I believe in order for it to be a game changer, we need to have real climate leaders. And the European Union is saying that we are a climate leader. But I think in order to be really truthful and also be able to make that argument, we should, with our own targets, be in line with the Paris Agreement goals. But for instance, the climate action tracker, which is a science-based think tank that checks on the different targets. It rates the European Union's own targets as insufficient because it's between 2 and 3 degrees. So we have to be actually better than that in order to be a real leader, in order also to be the actor that is pushing for the game-changing moments. There are some interesting things happening at COP. The COP presidency probably will start an initiative for a coal phase out by developed countries by the year 2030. I think this is really important, and the EU as a global climate leader should be part of this coalition for coal phase out by the year 2030. And there will be probably another initiative for the end of the fossil internal combustion engine by the year 2035. Also here, this is what in the Fit for 55 package of the EU is already in. I hope that the European Union is part of it. Another thing that we will be discussing, which could be a game changer in the opposite side, is the question of international carbon markets, Article 6. And the question, can CO2 reduction certificates be traded internationally, and what are the rules for it? And here we had this at the last conference in Madrid as well. Some countries are still pushing, for instance, for some things like double counting. And if we do not have very tight, strict rules on international carbon trading, then actually there is only CO2 emission reduction on paper, but not in real world. And if this happens, then the whole integrity of the Paris system will be undermined. So we should be really avoiding having something in Article 6 on international carbon trading that is then undermining the Paris Agreement. Looking forward to this debate with you now and see whether this really can be a game changer or not.
Michael, thank you so much. Jana, over to you.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. At the beginning, I would just like to underline that negotiations within UNFCCC are already in full swing. So for most negotiators, COP is just one of the events, the culmination of events, but work is already being done daily. So this is a perspective that probably should be taken into account when talking about the possible outcome of COP26. Additionally, COP26 in Glasgow will be definitely a game changer because it, for the first time in the history of climate negotiations, talks will be conducted in very special pandemic circumstances, which are still quite unpredictable, but they will definitely add to the negotiation swings, so to say. As for the substance, both Philippe and Michael already mentioned lots of, there is quite a lot on the table. Our planet is already in the midst of an unprecedented environmental crisis. IPCC report is very clear. We are running out of time, and I really hope that the changes will appear sooner than later. Thanks.
Janet, thank you so much. Anthony, over to you.
Thank you. And yeah, great pleasure to be here. In terms of the title, it says, can it be a game changer? The answer is yes, but the key question is, will it be? And I think the previous speakers have highlighted some of the areas that we will judge COP26 against. And so maybe just to build on some of those, I mean, I think firstly, it is about delivery. It isn't, what we're looking at is very different from the situation in Paris, where the intention was to sign an agreement. We're now looking at seeing how that agreement is being implemented. And so delivery, implementation is absolutely key. As Michael mentioned, we are nowhere near the targets in terms of 2 or 1 or even 1.5 degrees. And so we need to see significant progress in terms of the NDCs, the nationally determined contribution, the pledges from the different signatories of Paris. The next 2 weeks will be crucial for this. We have seen some step changes in terms of pledges. United States, Japan, EU, UK, all have done a raised ambition and raised their pledges, but not all key countries has. And I think what we are looking towards in terms of pre-COP is the G20 the weekend before, so the end of October, where in Rome, we'll see the G20 meeting. And the G20 countries have said that they will, prior to COP, revise their NDCs. So in particular, looking at India, China, Russia, Australia, these are all countries that can make a difference in terms of the overall emissions level in 2030. So for me, this is a key test. Will we see raising ambition? The second area is about the 100 billion. So previously, the developed countries have pledged 100 billion to assist developing and vulnerable countries to meet their mitigation and adaptation targets. It is something that should be met, needs to be met, both in terms of its on-the-ground impact, but also politically. We have to have the developing vulnerable countries feeling that they are being supported in this transition. Without it, I think there will be a very bad feeling. So I see this as a key test for COP26 is, will we reach the 100 billion per year pledge that developing countries have made? And finally, just the other area that we need to look at, and I think Michael mentioned in terms of Article 6, there's other issues about transparency and time limits in terms of reporting. These are sort of the nuts and the bolts that we need to have agreed in order to make the Paris Agreement function better. So for me, those are the 3 areas that we will be particularly following in the coming month. Thank you very much indeed.
Anthony, thank you. You're very welcome. Thank you so much. Alison Martin.
Thanks, Brian. So I would very much agree with my fellow panelists. So I think this year we've seen lots of commitments, but words clearly aren't going to cool the planet. Actions will. And I think as Philippe started off with saying, well, actually we need speed and courage to take the actions now, rather than continuing just to make new commitments. I think this year, over the course of the summer, again, we've been reminded very starkly of the reasons why the action has to happen on both the adaptation side, to the physical risks that is crystallizing right here, right now, and also on the transition side, so that we actually save the future. I think for us, we produce annually a climate change scorecard. So we published it in September. We look at 12 different variables to assess the probability of us being able to actually hit the 1.5 degree, which obviously is the limit that has been recognized by science, to the earlier points from the IPCC. Now, we saw this year that a little bit more had gone green, although it's still amber in total, but that's very much a function of the pandemic. So things like renewable energy is a real positive, that we're seeing increasing amounts of renewable energy being put onto the grid systems, but fuel subsidies and the actual amounts of carbon being emitted, we're seeing already in 2021 the reduction and the reversal of many of the good positive steps that we saw last year. I think in terms of the carbon pricing variable, which is one of the key ones we look at, I could be optimistic and say we've seen some positive steps. So more than 20% now of carbon emissions are actually covered by some form of pricing scheme. However, it's simply not enough. In order for us to really meet the ambition of Paris, we need to break the link between greenhouse gas emissions and economic growth. And we clearly haven't done that yet. And we at Zurich believe one of the best ways of doing that is to continue to roll out carbon pricing type schemes so that we have a true price on the externality of the production of emissions. And if it's implemented in an appropriate way, we can effectively make sure that the economics of market dynamics will enable us to deliver on the kinds of investment that we critically need with the kind of transparency and consistent measurement that's going to enable us to be effective in this transition. Now, the question, I guess, was can COP26 deliver this? I think my view at the moment is perhaps it can deliver on some of this. And I am a bit of an optimist, but I hope I'm not being too optimistic in that.
I think perhaps is not the definition of optimism, Alison. So let's see how we get with this. Michael, let's bring back some of these remarks that you made, also Alison made about carbon markets. And you mentioned about the climate action tracker, where the EU is between 2 and 3 degrees. That's not amazing, given the amount of discussion there's been since Paris as well, that we're still 2 to 3 degrees on our own tracker, when Europe is talking about being a global leader and being hypercritical of those who don't fall into line in a hurry as well. Why are we so far off the mark?
Well, because we decided so. We had a long debate around the climate law in last year. There we had different positions. Actually, the European Parliament had in majority a position to be really ambitious. We wanted to have a gross 60% reduction instead of the net 55% that was then voted by the council also. So there are a lot of also small things where we can actually really improve. For instance, now in the Fit for 55 package, we say that there should be no tax breaks anymore for kerosene. But the tax breaks will only end in the year 2032. So this could end. We are still giving free CO2 certificates for internal flights in the EU, because with the explanation, otherwise carbon leakage would happen. So they would fly outside of the European Union. So there's a lot of things where we can actually be really better than currently proposed. So this is something what in the next 2 years, I hope will happen, that we will discuss this big legislative package and also improve it to be on track, at least for the 2 degrees. But yeah, we had a big chance to be really in line with science last year. And unfortunately, because of the political circumstances, there was no majority for being really in line with science and with Paris.
Okay, Philippe, is it fair to say Europe hasn't done its own homework in this, or is this just political reality that if we push too far too fast, we leave the public behind and we end up with populists who, even climate deniers, who will embrace this as a means to find their way into power and actually reverse what has been achieved in terms of climate policy? Why are we so far behind?
Oh, this very political question, of course. I'll try to answer in a not too political way. We should also recall that the European Union, although big, is not the main emitter. This is not to put the blame on the others, certainly not. The fact that the US now returns into the game is a remarkable development. Also, the fact that they took a commitment to climate neutrality by 2050 is also remarkable. But nevertheless, I think we lost too much time in looking at what the others are doing, and perhaps we could have worked more on what we could achieve. Although we need to also recall that the European Union has been meeting its objectives since the beginning of climate policies. the 20% target was reached, and the EU can show that it delivers on its commitment, which is quite not sufficiently known in the population. In the population, we assume that commitments taken by politicians are never met. Some are, and they were met, and the economy of the EU was not wrecked. This is an important lesson, because I've been working on climate policies since quite a while, and the economic analysis of the file often was anticipating a high cost, in particular in the US, but also in the EU. And this did not materialize, and we have discovered that through innovation, actually, we can do much more at a lower price. And this is a message of hope for the future. We can do even more, and we can sustain a sound economy that is working efficiently towards sustainability.
Thank you, Alison. The economic growth and greenhouse gas cycle. How do we break that chain? And 20% of carbon covered by pricing at the moment. How do we change that system? And just like Philippe said, the cost, it has been adjusted, and we can recalculate now. And here in the United States, for example, the infrastructure bill, which is slowly going through Congress, has a lot of focus on investing in innovation to achieve climate objectives as well, and to build resilience. So, are you optimistic in this sense that this decoupling of economic growth and climate damage is possible and is actually happening now?
So I think there were two questions there. Is it possible? Absolutely, yes. Is it happening right now? Possibly not right now. I think we clearly see the amount of investments that is needed in order to support the transition. That has hugely, potentially massive benefits for all economies who choose to do it. So whether that is the US's infrastructure bill, whether that's the EU's new Green Deal, or the Recovery Resolution Funds, all of these trillions of dollars that are going in to support the kinds of infrastructure that we will need in order to support transition, that supports growth, that supports jobs, prosperity. So that would make me optimistic that, and because I would align with that, the fact that this is something that business is calling for. How can we support it? How can long-term investors such as ourselves, how can we be part of this? So we have capital we would like to be able to put to work at this. I think a great announcement last week, obviously, and the successful issuance of the EU's 12 billion green bond. I think more and more governments issuing green bonds. I think that can only help as well. So on the investment side, I think all of the momentum is certainly positive, but the amounts are clearly nowhere near enough yet. But hopefully that's simply a yet. I think on the broader carbon pricing question, I think Philippe said it earlier, it's a very political topic, clearly. And I think unless the population are convinced appropriately with sufficient transparency around how this is going to impact on their wallets, so how can we make sure that we can redistribute the amounts so that it doesn't become a tax on those who are most vulnerable within communities? I think in principle, the economics of it works well, and it provides the right kind of market signals to enable the investment that we need into clean technology. But without it being very thoughtfully and carefully applied, clearly can have very inequitable consequences.
Thank you. Anthony, just to build on what Alison said, ensuring that there's an equitable change here in terms of policy direction and achieving climate objectives. The infrastructure bill, for example, and the Green Deal, they're focused on innovation as part of this package as well, which is designed also to ensure job creation in the long term as well. But part of this is resilience. So it's not just about carbon reduction, but also mitigation of climate harm. So building infrastructure which can sustain floods and fire as well. So do you see this rebalancing in terms of economic possibility as something which can really be achieved, not necessarily by focusing on just on carbon reduction, but focusing on innovation and investment as well? Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, it's addressing climate change is a package, isn't it? We need to look at it by sector in terms of mitigation, but also then in terms of adaptation, building resilience within new infrastructure. And we have seen pledges, obviously the Fit for 55 within the EU, a lot of money going into climate-friendly activities, hopefully in the United States. I do think that the infrastructure and the other bill that are, as you said, going painfully through the legislative process in the US will be crucial. It really needs to be delivered by COP in order to give the US some validity to its plans. Without this, it's much more difficult then to put pressure or encourage other countries to move ahead with their mitigation plans. If I could add a couple of things. One is in terms of what was said, the importance of redistribution. We know that the carbon price is an important vehicle for highlighting the environmental externalities associated with the use of fossil fuels. We know that there are huge differences in the carbon price. For example, in the EU, it's around 60 euros a ton. In China, who introduced a carbon market for the first time this year, it's less than $10 a ton, and a global average of around 3. So there's huge differences. But despite these differences, in all cases, it's politically contentious, and we can reduce some of the political opposition by ensuring that it is a vehicle for redistribution. So to enable some of the investment within mitigation and adaptation in poorer countries or in poorer parts of individual countries, so poorer regions. So touch upon those, but can I just go back one question in terms of the EU, in terms of, is that okay?
Yes, go ahead, no problem.
Yes, sorry, just as a Brit, I don't really want to defend the EU, but I will do. No, I mean, seriously, in terms of the Fit 55 package, it isn't adequate, but it is quite ambitious in certain areas. And it doesn't rate in terms of meeting the 2 degrees, but it is better than most other countries. And so I think it's important to recognize that it is ambitious, but I think in particular sectors, the EU needs to go much further and faster. So we can see that successful change within the switch for electricity supply. Much more needs to be done on energy efficiency. Much more needs to be done in the sort of food and land use sector, where it's much more difficult to reduce emissions. So I think it is encouraging what's happened. So to go from 40 to 55% cut is good, not good enough, but it is better than many other countries.
Excellent. UK's carbon reduction strategy of shortages and lack of trucks going through the countries to be applauded as well, Anthony. Short term, though that may seem. Okay, so I want to talk, Jana, about the gamesmanship that's involved here as well. Paris was torturous to get an agreement on the table. There's a different dynamic at play now today as well. But when it comes to China, dealing with trade policy and simultaneously climate policy and throwing human rights into the mix as well, that's a little tricky. So in terms of how the European Union is conducting its negotiations, does it simply have to take a laser-like focus on climate here, or are we trying to balance other critical dimensions of human rights and trade as well? Jana?
Yeah, if Paris was treacherous, Glasgow is going to be even more so, I would say. I would like to go back also, because the stimulus of the stimulation of the debate here is really great. But to sum up just on China, I would say that that too much focus on just one player is never a wise thing, I would say. China is probably not the main player in terms of the Glasgow outcome, because we had so many different parties with so many different propositions on the table that probably it's best to have a very quiet diplomacy, respecting different measurements which are used in China's economy, and during negotiation process, they don't have the same approach on nationally determined contributions. They will, if they will go to 260, it is their choice. But we can probably do most if we sit with them as often as we can and try to just to pair our methodologies and our different ways of thinking. That would be on short. But if I also can go back to climate resilience, which is probably one of the, I'm wearing the EU presidency hat at the moment, one of the biggest issues of my country's presidency. I would say that the basic realities of climate change in terms of climate resilience are the follows. We need to understand that costs of inaction are much, much higher than those of not acting, not acting. And there are many different ways and options of adaptations, from incremental to transformative, transfer of activities, managed retreats, etc. And we need to basically ensure that the options used are no regrets measures, such as you mentioned, investing in green infrastructure.
Excellent. I like that phrase, no regrets measures. It seems to me that in terms of political communication, there should be much more discussion about that and much less about increasing taxes on carbon, which automatically translates into my car is going to be more expensive to run. Michael, let's talk a little bit about finance on this as well. And you talked about transparency earlier. What are the big issues here? What needs to be addressed that would make the most impact? And if Glasgow could deliver on that, you'd be particularly happy. What's going to shift the agenda and achieve real clarity?
Yeah, I hope I understood everything, because unfortunately it seems my connection is not that good. So infrastructure investments should always happen, also in Europe and in Germany, into good internet connections. As it was said, in 2009 there was the promise to give developing countries $100 billion a year for their adaptation, for their mitigation efforts, and these have not been met yet, and we will also not meet them. The European Commission and Ursula von der Leyen, in her State of the European Union speech, she announced additional finances going towards climate finance, but also with these additional billions even, we are not there yet. So I think this really needs to happen. Because we know that, how do you say, like there is the investments in the south, they are a lot more effective in terms of emission reduction per dollar than we have it in developing countries. So it actually really makes a lot of sense. But yeah, it is not easy, as we are struggling to get financing on many different issues also inside the European Union. Financing the transition is something that we need to discuss, and we also need to discuss how we get all of this investment flowing. And here, I think it's a good mix between public and private money, but also, for instance, when we see there's a lot of demand for green bonds, but still a lot of, for instance, companies that want to decarbonize, they are also still searching for investors that give them actually the trust that the decarbonization will also work.
Just on the green bonds and investment as well, I was discussing this in the context of COVID and digital technology the other day too. But the Juncker plan, when it was rolled out, it had Commissioner Katainen running around Europe selling investment projects as well. And people I just discussed this with at the time, they said, look, the finance is fine, but what we need are projects. And the big investors wanted to see substantial projects. Do you think we need a climate salesman or woman to be going around Europe selling the projects and the green bonds to move this forward faster, rather than something which is simply sitting on the shelf as an option? Michael?
I think that we need at least a clear system that qualifies what is green and what is not for financing. And this is the EU taxonomy for sustainable finance. However, here we are also currently in a decision-making process. Some believe that nuclear energy and even gas is sustainable. I would not say that, not for nuclear energy, because it is completely unclear where to store the nuclear waste. This is a huge problem, and we know this has to be safe for the next million years, and we know that this is actually almost impossible to find something that is safe for the next millions of years. And for gas also, it is very climate intensive. It has very negative effects on the climate crisis. Counting not only the emission when burning, but also counting the methane emissions of the transport. So yeah, the EU taxonomy could be, I think, a great game changer, but it really needs to be done well.
Thank you. Philippe, in the same kind of direction, in terms of the investment, do we need to up our game when it comes to selling the financial opportunities here, the business opportunities of investing in climate-worthy projects and having them financed through green bonds and other projects like this, other structures like this, Philippe?
Yeah, what I see is that the business is ready to move, and they are very efficient when they are pushed to move. We even see that now with the increase of the energy prices. Part is due to a shortage of some fossil fuels because they disinvested some of the energy companies in fossil fuel, and then there is a lack of supply. There are many reasons, but it shows that business is able to react fast, even before the legislations are adopted, only on the signals, the policy signals. And therefore, yes, we need to find a way to deploy faster. I don't know if you're aware, but the research program of the EU Horizon can fund to a certain level of application, which is called the technology readiness level. I don't want to get technical here, but there's no deployment program. So this means that all this research is funded by the public entities, and then it's left to the uptake by society, business, and others. And this is where we lose a lot of time. It's well known, this issue of the debt valley in Europe. And it's unfortunate because we have no time for the transition. We need to also redefine the role of the public sector in there to bring these solutions that are there, that have been developed through research and innovation faster to the ground. And we are trying to do that through what is called the missions of Horizon Europe. I don't know if you heard about this, but then I can make a little bit of publicity for it. This was adopted by the Commission on the 29th of September, and the missions are about that. It's about bringing adaptation to climate change on place-based activities in some areas in Europe where there are some critical needs. It's about having 100 climate-neutral cities, protecting the oceans, and so on. There are 5 missions, and 4 are called the Green Deal missions. And this is a vehicle to try to go faster to the deployment phase through the usage of different funding instruments, be it public instruments and private instruments. And the instruments have a lot to do in there. They can help us very much.
2 commercial pitches in there. Thank you, Philippe. Excellent. And Anthony, when you look at this landscape as described by Philippe, there's a lot there on the table which can be done. And we're talking about COP26 and Glasgow and the big policy dimensions. But if businesses as ready as Philippe says, it's not really down to the policymakers in large part. It's simply a matter of the actionable business models. Do you see it that way? Is there enough on the table to get this done to achieve our climate objectives if business is more engaged and the finance is more easily available?
It's always a combination, isn't it? I mean, the scale of the increase in investment is just extraordinary. So if you look at the IEA, it published its World Energy Outlook last week. Basically, we need to increase the investment in low carbon technologies threefold this decade. So it isn't, the market is gradually increasing, but it's not going fast enough. If you look at Bloomberg New Energy Finance in terms of their annual review of investment over the last 4 or 5 years, static to slightly increasing to around roughly it's around 300 billion per year dollars of investment in low carbon technologies in the energy sector. So yeah, we're seeing some change. It's not fast enough. So I think business recognizes it needs to move faster, but it probably needs some more nudging and pulling and pushing from government policy. And so it's creating that policy framework that gives the investors the confidence that the direction that they're going is secure. And I think there's probably a number of areas that you could do that. People are always looking at it. We've touched upon carbon pricing. There's of course subsidies for fossil fuels. If we accelerate the removal of those, then that creates or removes some of the disincentive to invest in alternatives. And then there's also, in different countries, there's sort of non-fiscal barriers to the deployment of different technologies. And I think they are particularly relevant, for example, on energy efficiency. It's not an economic question. It's about changing the rules to enable and encourage greater energy efficiency. That will be crucial. So yeah, in summary, the private sector is, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. So close. Finish what you're saying.
No, I mean, it's clear that in and around COP, we're seeing the private sector saying we are willing to act. There is investment, there is technologies, but it's not being deployed at sufficient scale. So yeah, governments have a role to enable that to speed up.
You touched on energy security there as well. The idea that this gas crisis shouldn't shake people and companies into action independently of government, simply to be able to ensure an affordable energy stream. Is, Anthony, in your perception, things like the gas crisis, these are short-term impacts where government just throws more money at the problem until it goes away, but you're already seeing energy companies, gas companies failing in the United Kingdom, and not just the United Kingdom, because of this gas crisis. And the average consumer is facing much higher energy bills as well. And we had this discussion 5, 6, 7 years ago as well about energy security, and still we don't seem any closer to solving this problem. So we've got a lack of security, higher energy costs. We're still polluting the planet at an aggressive rate. At which point does government say enough, and at which point does business say this is our opportunity? Anthony, and then Jana.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know. Well, I will keep repeating myself. An example in terms of the gas price is energy efficiency. We know it's difficult to legislate on, and it's very, very difficult to implement, but yet it does solve all of these questions simultaneously. It does address energy security, it does address climate change, and it does affect energy poverty, because it is a cheap way in which people can reduce their energy bills. So it really is something that is staring us in the face, but it doesn't happen partly because it's not sexy, but also just because it is more complicated to do. So you're right, this is another crisis, and it should be that governments seize the nettle and make this the time to push forward energy efficiency, because as I said, it addresses all of these three questions simultaneously. Thank you.
Jana, then Michael. Jana.
Yeah, I would just to add, I've read this great book, Mission Economy, by Mariana Mazzucato recently, and she proposes, she proposes that probably governments should do much more in terms of creating a space for private companies to get in, right? But this is probably in our Western society, it's a preposterous idea to give more power to governments, but evidently we'll need to do it. But in terms of international financial system, as far as I know, I believe that OECD works very intensely on tracking financial flows, both private and public. So I don't believe that the measurement should be such a big issue, as we are heading towards transparency. We are heading towards transparent financial system in that regard.
Thank you. Michael, I want to hear from Alison on the same theme as well. Michael. Can you hear?
Well, did you say Alison first or me?
No, you first, Michael. Just in terms of the energy security dynamics of public-private sector and the repetition of the same cycle of let's not use the word chaos, but the cycle of problems without being able to find a way out of this quickly.
I think what also was said by the Commission is very true. If we would have started the Green Deal much earlier, we would not have these problems now, because the problems come from high gas prices, also from a global high demand on gas and a shortage actually. And we know that this will actually stay like this. So the measures to really get independent from fossil fuels, they have to be taken now. Unfortunately, they are only in a mid-term effectiveness. So the question is what we do immediately to help people in energy poverty to still be able to heat their homes in winter. I think there's a lot of important things being put on the table. For instance, to give support to energy poor communities, but also, for instance, to ban disconnecting people from the energy grid or from the gas grid during winter when they have to heat their homes. But this does not really solve the problem. The problem is solved by being much more energy efficient, insulating our houses, and also having renewable energies much more, because they are more cheap than fossil. This is already true now, but it will be even more true in the future with them more being developed. But yeah, this is the way forward, I think, for Europe. Like many say that gas is a bridge technology towards climate neutrality. I currently see that now having a lot of investment into gas will not really help us in this transformation, but we should really go into those technologies that we have, saving energy and deploying much more renewable energies and helping the people who are in need now in this very moment.
Thank you. Alison, same tone, the public-private capacity to resolve what essentially is an energy security and equity issue.
So maybe I very much would agree with what's already been said, maybe to add a different point to it. I think it's yet another example of the importance of building resilience. And in order to do that, you need to actually have a forward-looking plan, understanding what the risks are that you face, whether that's as government, as business, or even as individuals. And then you determine what's the right strategy to try and build that resilience. I mean, coming back to a point that Jana made earlier that I think was really important around how little money is actually spent on adaptation to the physical risk of climate change. We do a lot of, we obviously pay a heck of a lot of claims, which are the result of extreme weather events. And we do a lot of research looking into, okay, well, what caused these? What could have been done differently? What are the lessons we've learned through our post-event review capability studies, which we do with third parties, NGOs, academia. And the conclusions are so, I mean, it's so obvious that for every $1 that you spend building resilience to communities, to businesses, to governments, you save 5 in post-event recovery. And I think that's a lesson that we seem to struggle with as humanity, that actually making those investments into resilience does economically pay off.
Is the invisible hand waiting to be deployed here more so than policy making, in the sense that insurers, not just Zurich, but others obviously, would not be able to finance public authorities where they're failing to invest in this because the long-term risk would be too high? You know, how does that dynamic play in terms of finance and insurance? Is this kind of market mover dynamic something which is underplayed at the moment, or something which still has a lot of potential to really force people to take climate change seriously? Even if they don't agree with the science, they have to agree with the economics. Alison.
Yes, although that might act a little bit too slowly as being the tool. And I think it's much better if we work collectively as public policy with government and regulation as well as through business. I don't think it should be business alone determines what is insurable and what is not. I think to your point on actually, would we ultimately end up in a position where insurers are effectively saying, if you do not build the following flood defences or you don't provide the following protection against extreme fire events, then you're not insurable. To some extent, that clearly happens already today. We have one of the largest risk engineering teams and a fantastic natural hazards practice and built out climate resilience services that does exactly that to help businesses understand the risks that they face, they're exposed to, and how they can build resilience. But I don't think it's our job to say, okay, doing a different set of activities could change the amount of risk that you face. And we would hope that collectively people would want to protect their lives and their livelihoods. But ultimately, it's for governments to regulate around what is actually going to be insurable into the future. And they need to, because a lot of the solutions that are necessary would require public infrastructure investment rather than just individual.
Okay, thank you, Philippe. On this as well, in terms of how you use nudge factors, European financing touches many different areas, cohesion funds, for example, as well. How structured is this kind of dynamic of investing in resilience? And are there any punitive elements where member states which don't invest in resilience do not receive more funding? Or if that isn't the case, should that happen? Philippe?
Okay, I'll answer your question. But before, if I may put a bit of spice in the debate, it's just
spice away.
So the reinsurance sector was the first one of being interested in climate science, and they are to be praised for that. Many years ago, when I was working on modeling, those were the first I was in contact with. Now, in the debate on adaptation, it's clear that we need to increase the investment on adaptation. But most of the local constituencies tell us, look, we don't have the data. We don't know enough about this. And I would like to call here for more transparency in the information and more dissemination of the economic information and risk-related information that insurance and reinsurance have towards the local authorities. That would help them tremendously in planning their investment and therefore engage in adaptation policies. And to answer your question about the investment, well, we saw that in the recovery package in Next Generation EU, the part on adaptation is probably insufficient. Also, the part on research and innovation itself. But we can't force the member states. Of course, there are some guidelines by the Commission, and we repeat those. But in the end, we know very well that the powers of the Commission there is limited, and it's up to the member states really to think at their own interest on the long term and not only on short term to make this investment the best way to rebuild better.
But why should member states that don't take this direction receive European Union funding? The rule of law, for example, the discussion is withholding funding until there's compliance with rule of law. Why should the European Union fund projects which don't achieve the level of resilience and the level of carbon reduction which are necessary? Surely the climate issue is perhaps even more important than the rule of law, Philippe.
This is highly political question. I will avoid it. And I would say, in a short, it's their money. We should never expect that the European Commission can decide alone on member states' money. We never do that. We propose, they decide. It's their money.
We should put that to one or two commissioners and see if we get a different response. Let's ask a politician in the House. Michael, should this be the case? Should the European Union be withholding funds from member states that don't invest efficiently in resilience issues? Because this is a waste of money. We heard from Alison, it's $1 and resilience saves $5 as well. Why are we throwing €4 down the drain, literally, when it comes to European Union taxpayers' money? Michael. I think we're having some tech issues here. Just give a second. Can you unmute, Michael? There we go.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I
you're
didn't
good.
understand your question.
Okay, so basically, why should the European Union give money to member states that fail to invest in resilience? When we heard from Alison that €1 invested in resilience and adaptation will save five euros and help achieve the climate objectives. We do this with the rule of law; it's already on the table. We do this with other dimensions as well. Is this something? Is this stick required as well as the carrot to ensure that there's climate compliance? I think you're having problems there. Okay,
I mean, it would be best for you to connect to the next person. I just try to reload and.
Go ahead, do that. We'll come back to you in just a moment, and the technical team will give you some assistance there. Jana, I know you won't be able to answer that particular question. Let's talk about the climate leadership on this as well. What are the leadership dynamics? And I want to ask Anthony the same. Leadership dynamics at play in Glasgow. Is this simply a matter of the big players carving up a deal, or is the US in the driving seat now and hoping for Chinese compliance, and the European Union trying to have goodwill towards all nations? What are the leadership dynamics at play here, Jana?
Well, first of all, yes, they are the big players which are in the lead for sure. It was mentioned that G20 will have in Rome just before COP26 a summit, and I believe that lots of negotiation tracks will be covered in Rome already. Probably wording on some issues will probably defined. I don't know about commitments. This is still a big question mark, but definitely yes. As probably you've heard that UK presidency is pressing very hard on G20, and that's they are probably the ones who are in the lead. But at the same time, we should not forget that climate negotiations are mostly about developed and developing countries' relations, which are in a sense very fragile. They can be ultimately breakable sometimes. So this is the general context that at least I can see it. So it's not just about not just about commitment. It's also about who is affected the most and how to compensate for the previous emissions, and how to calculate, as it was mentioned before, how to put the sufficient and proper timeframes and to do both adaptation and mitigation. So yes, dynamic between developing and developed is even more crucial, I would say.
Thank you. Anthony, the same question on leadership. Jean-Claude Juncker was asked about some elements of I think it was the Eurozone at the time. And he said, we know what we need to do, but we won't be able to do it with the electorate. And is this the same case with the leadership here for Glasgow? Is that politicians know what needs to be done, but the courage to bring that home to the electorate, regardless of which nation it is, may be lacking. Where's the leadership going to come from? What do you think the dynamics are at play?
I mean, I agree with Jana in terms of its, as mentioned, the G20, the dynamic between the developing and the developed world. I think we'll see leadership in multiple forms because, as we've talked through, it's not. This is a COP about implementation. So implementation is on some level on the national government responsibility, but it is also for non-state actors. So and the way in which the COP calendar over the 2 weeks is set up, we have on the Monday and Tuesday the heads of state, and then we have specific sector days. So for example, we'll have energy, we'll have environment, nature, there's finance, etc. So on each of those, I would anticipate that there will be announcements of multilateral initiatives to achieve more rapid mitigation or adaptation within those particular sectors. So in some ways, on each of those days, we will have different leadership. And the intention is that these will add up to a greater package of adaptation and mitigation measures over and above the NDCs and the 100 billion that has been talked about. So yeah, there is multiple degrees of leadership. It's also, of course, as you mentioned, the public. Is it that they're scared to bring back something to the public? I don't think so. I think it is a recognition to some degree of the enormous challenge that we're facing. When we're talking about decarbonizing the global economy within 30 years, this is a transformation that we haven't seen before. So it is daunting for many politicians. But I think the public is there. And I think opinion poll after opinion poll says that they're looking for governments and industry to move further and faster on climate change. So I really do hope that the leaders that are in Glasgow don't use the excuse that the public doesn't want to move on this issue as a reason for not getting more ambitious.
Alison, how do you see this as well? Coming from the commercial side, you think the leadership dynamics, as it's just been described by Jan and Anthony, are there? Or do you think there's still more goodwill from the public on this than perhaps is understood? How do you read it?
I should try and avoid political questions, I think. We measure, one of the things we put in our scorecard is public sentiment, and we still have that as amber, because whilst there are plenty in the public who are very, very vocal about the need for transition to be very rapid, there are unfortunately still plenty who that doesn't seem to be the case. So I'm not sure I could say definitively the public are behind taking fast action. I think our corporates, I think many in the corporate sector now are coming out very vocally with, importantly, not just commitments, but concrete actions and the plan can be tracked against. And I think one of the things that we would call for is for all industries to be under similar kind of disclosure standards. So we have very level playing fields. If we all agree to science-based taxonomies and approaches that we can all measure within industry. Obviously, the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance was convened by the UN, should be 18 months ago now, and came up with methodology which all of its members have now set and committed to target reduction against that by 25. We're one of the founding members of the Net Zero Insurance Alliance to do the same thing for the insurance underwriting. I think, and obviously it's not just with the assets insurers, as each industry group agrees a method by which it wants to be held to account. It wants to provide a transparency so that our investors, our customers, our employees, all of the people who we work with can make a choice transparently around who they do business with, who they choose to work for, and who they're a customer of, based on what we're committing to do, but more importantly, the tracking of progress against those commitments that we've made. Because I think it's action now, not words.
Excellent. Thank you. Michael, let's see if we can hear you and you can hear us this time as well. You're reconnected. There's a couple of questions. I'll give these questions to Michael to start with. We don't have a lot of time left. Mantis asked, why is the adaptation of the food sector to climate change, why has it disappeared from the COP26 goals? I'm not sure it has, but maybe there's less emphasis on it. You want to take that one first, Michael? So is there not enough emphasis on food sector this time around?
I'll give you something on leadership, though. I didn't really fully understand the question.
It's okay. Go ahead on leadership.
Really interesting is that we see the Fridays for Future movement really coming back to the streets, also with the Corona lockdown phasing out on many places. So we just had a massive strike, people coming out in Belgium. We had one just before the German election. And on the 22nd, so next week, or this week actually, and we are seeing the global climate strike. So I believe that this kind of youth movement is coming back, really asking their leaders to be accountable to them, asking their questions. Look, this is about my future, and science is clear what my future will look like if you are not acting. And I think this is a really powerful message that leaders have to reply to if they want to be accountable towards their constituency. And I'm looking forward to have this this strong messaging from the public back in the debate. And I believe that the initiatives in the direction of phasing out coal by the year 2030 and phasing out the combustion engine, this is also really important. And it's nice and it's good that there are these initiatives, but I hope really that, the leaders will then come out and be bold, as it was said in the beginning, to really make these important steps and commit then to, for instance, phasing out coal. Phasing out coal would be really this, low-hanging fruit that would save us a lot of problems if we are early out of coal, because this is still the biggest CO2 emitter, and it would give us actually some time in areas where it's more difficult to reduce emissions. So I hope that this combination will actually create a situation where we can be one step more towards really fulfilling the Paris Agreement after the COP26 than we were before.
Thank you, Michael. We're pretty close in time. I want to get to some closing statements in just a few minutes, but I want to talk really briefly about technology. Is technology the answer? And if I can just run through the panel and ask each of you very quickly what you think of this as well. All the policy dynamics have touched on this. I'm sure you're going to say technology, yes, is part of the answer. But do you see big moments? For example, hydrogen is just one example of how that can be deployed. The technology from 5G and smart cities and automation, things like this as well. Is technology a bigger part of this equation than we're currently describing? Philippe.
We need to be very careful with the excessive hopes on technology only. It's clear that behavior has a big role to play, and change of organization of the society itself. Technology is part of the solution, that's obvious, but it's actually probably a smaller part that we think of. And the COVID crisis has shown also what can be achieved through technology, what can be also achieved through behavior changes. But there's a lot to do on urbanism and other activities, the way we build, we rebuild, the recycling of materials in the construction sector. Those are in every area of society. And we have not talked about the reform of agriculture because it's a very sensitive topic, but this is also an area where there's a lot of potential. And it's not necessarily technology there. For instance, we are promoting quite a lot in the EU nature-based solutions. Those have no technology, but those are solutions that are economically feasible and deliver results on climate, on biodiversity, in resilience in general. So yes.
Thank you. Just a quick answers from a few others. Jana nodding enthusiastically there. Alison, technology, should this be a bigger part of the discussion than currently is the case?
So assuming by technology, and I think the questioner was saying that it's much broader than simply negative emission technology, then absolutely yes. I mean, if I just look at it from a corporate perspective, kind of 3 steps for corporates to take in thinking about this. So the first, abatement, understanding how to actually reduce the amount of emissions. I think technology plays a massive part in that, whether that's through sensors, as you've spoken about before, infrastructure. I mean, there's a huge amount that technology can play in actually supporting abatement and looking at compensation for the amount of emissions. Obviously, we talked about carbon pricing, different carbon trading schemes. Again, technology can support and facilitate that around the world. And then, of course, yes, finally, neutralization, and technology can play an important role both in nature-based solutions, so in assessing things like soil quality, as well as actually things like direct air capture storage and CCUS more broadly. So yes, I think technology plays an important role across the board.
Thank you. Quick word from Anthony in this, and then we'll start our closing statements. Go ahead.
Yeah, 2 things on technology. Firstly, it gives us more reason to be optimistic. If we look at the technology prices when the Paris Agreement was signed, for example, in renewables compared to where they are now, we know that there can be huge and rapid changes that can change the economics of existing industrial sectors, obviously the power sector first and foremost. Secondly, there are interesting areas. Animal agriculture, around 15% of global emissions. And we know that there is, lab grown meat is a possibility. It may not be what everyone wants to eat, but it may be what a large proportion of the world wants to eat, which could lead to really rapid reductions in other areas. So technology does have a role, but it has to go hand in hand with public acceptance.
Thank you. We're pretty close on time, so let's go to our closing sound bites. 30 seconds each. Philippe, you can kick off.
Time to implement and act faster and forcefully. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you. Michael, over to you. Yes, go ahead. You can hear us now, Michael. Yeah, go.
Okay. Well, it's interesting also to comment on the technology question. A lot of technologies, they are already here. So we do not need to invent something new, but we can actually use the technologies at hand, renewables, for instance, energy efficiency. And I think it's also that a lot of citizens are already ready to change and they demand change. It's quite interesting to see also what even big companies ask for in terms of change. So the question is really, the game changer is politics, the political sphere, fast enough to do the developments that have already happened within the society and within technology. And I hope that we will be, but let's see. I think we are more smart after Glasgow.
Thank you. Jana.
Very short. Besides bold commitments, I believe that we need to have courage to listen to all negotiation parties. Besides on technologies and on technology side, besides artificial intelligence, we need emotional intelligence as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Anthony.
Yeah, I think the UK presidency has an objective, or maybe it's not, an unofficial objective is keeping 1.5 degrees alive. And I think that really, we need to keep that in mind in terms of, we may not make the pledges add up to 1.5 degrees, but if they don't, we need to have a mechanism to ensure that that can happen on the short term. So that may mean coming back with revised NDCs within a couple of years. That may be other means of verification, that may be other ways to accelerate technology transfer, etc. But that's the overall objective, that we come out of Glasgow with a pathway to keeping 1.5 degrees alive.
Staying alive. Maybe the team can play us out with that at the end as well. Alison, last word to you.
So thank you. So I think maybe I should be more optimistic, because I think we've heard through this great discussion, there's plenty of reasons to be optimistic that with governments, with corporates, with individuals acting together with sufficient speed and courage, back to Philippe's point, I think we can make this the decade of action. And with all the technological advances, as Michael said, already exists today. We have the tools in our hands. And if all it's going to take is courage, then we should be optimistic we can make this work.
Thank you so much to Philippe, Michael, Jana, Anthony, and Alison for excellent contributions today. Thank you to our audience for taking time to be with us also. And to Tamara, Zoran, and Malta, and the social media team at Euractiv. You don't see them, but they make everything work behind the scenes for us as well. And thanks to Zurich for supporting the discussion. Much more to come on this topic in the coming weeks. I wish you a good day wherever you are. I'm Brian McGuire.